Hey everybody, Mr. Tigert here. I just wanted to let you know that I really miss seeing you guys in class every day, and I'm so bummed because I had so many more things to teach you this year, so many more activities to do. But we are going to make the best of it because it is your education. So I'm going to try to every week do a little presentation here to go over some of the big ideas that we would have been covering had we been in class. So today, as you can tell by the title screen here, we are talking about the Enlightenment. So you may remember we are still here on our first global age. Um, and if you recall, before we left for the quarantine break, I guess we'll call it, we were talking about some big changes that were happening in Western Europe from the 1400s to the 1700s. Our big cultural and intellectual movements. They're going to transform Europe and really put it into a position to become the dominant continent for much of modern world history. So let's see if you remember some of these. You may remember we talked about the transformation of arts and literature that happened during the Renaissance. Man, I really hope that YouTube doesn't flag me for nudity here. Secondly, the transformation of religion in Europe. We had, beginning with religious reformers like Martin Luther, a questioning, a challenging of the authority of the Pope and the Catholic Church, which is eventually going to lead to the fragmentation, of European religion into a number of new denominations. Thirdly, we have the scientific revolution. This challenged preconceived notions. Many of them deeply held religious explanations for the natural world. We had scientists like Galileo Galilei challenging the idea that the sun is the center of the universe, or the solar system, rather, instead of the Earth. Of course, you have Sir Isaac Newton introducing his ideas of motion, dividing light into the spectrum. Other scientists dissecting human bodies to understand the cardiovascular system and how blood flows around the body, going beyond just the long held and accepted um, beliefs that had dominated Europe for hundreds and thousands of years. Now, our fourth big transformation we'll be looking at today is a transformation in the way that people looked at government, that we know as the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is the movement that is really going to challenge the accepted norms about government. So let's rewind here a little bit. How has the power of monarchs changed over time? There is a typo there. Wait, no, there isn't. Okay, that's correct. All right, here we go. So let's think about the history of government. Throughout most of the history of the world, you had one person in charge who was usually male and who usually ruled with the agreement, let's say, of the gods or with heaven. So in Europe, you had the divine right of kings, this notion that it was God that chose the monarch and his family to rule. In China, we of course had the mandate of heaven, that the ruling family and the emperor are in charge because of the favor of the ancestors. So, where's the monarch get his power from? He gets it from God. At least that was what was believed for most of history. And the power of that ruler was absolute, meaning they had the final say when it came to all laws, all big decrees and decisions that fell solely into the hands of this single ruler. So we call this absolute rule. So what's a problem with enjoining all power into the hands of one individual? Well, it could lead to tyranny. You know, Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? King Lizard Tyrant. That's what that means, right? Somebody help me out here. So, absolute power can lead to tyranny. There's that old saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, how did the Enlightenment start to push against these ideas? How did it change people's ideas about the power of government? Well, the Enlightenment we define as an intellectual movement lasting from the 1600s to the 1700s that applied science and reason to the study of society and government. So, just as the scientists of the scientific revolution had used reason and logic and observation and experimentation to try to understand the natural world, these political philosophers of the Enlightenment are trying to use those same techniques to understand government and society. So, some of the big guns of the Enlightenment include a couple of British gentlemen, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, who's probably the most influential. Also, several French thinkers like Baron de Montesquieu, Jean Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, some other ones. And it wasn't just all men, there's also prominent female Enlightenment thinkers such as Mary Wollstonecraft of England. So let's start first of all with Thomas Hobbes. So Thomas Hobbes is kind of seen, at least for this era, as the person that started the ideas that would transform into the Enlightenment. Hobbes came up with this foundational idea that we call the state of nature. So in his book, he described this sort of hypothetical condition, a time period when people lived before there was government. And what was it like? Well, Hobbes said it was like this. Like this. In the state of nature, the life of man is nasty, brutish, and short. So, what Hobbes said is before we had government, you know, it was like this. It was total chaos. There was constant warfare and conflict, and essentially the strong emerged to dominate the weak. And there was no freedom, there were no rights, and everything was generally just pretty awful. So Hobbes said, in order to bring an end to the state of nature, mankind created government. So his idea of a, ideal leader would be a scary absolute ruler, somebody that people would think twice about disobeying. He said that the greatest leader would be like a leviathan, like a sea monster that everyone was afraid to go up against, and because everyone was afraid, then they would stay in line, and we would have order in society and limited conflict and chaos and things like that. Now, his idea of the state of nature would be expanded on by another British Enlightenment thinker, John Locke. Now, Locke is really the big one here when it comes to Enlightenment, especially when we're talking about the origins of American government. So, Locke was also an English Enlightenment thinker. Um, he expanded on Hobbes's ideas about the state of nature. He also agreed that, without government, there would be chaos. And so we created government to bring an end to that chaos and in order to have an orderly society. Um, Locke, said that in order we created governments in order to protect what he called our natural rights as individuals. It's like if we as a class decided that we were going to, make a contract, that we were going to set some rules aside that we're all going to agree to follow, like we're not going to kill each other, unless it's self-defense, of course. We're not going to steal. We're not going to have any slavery, and we all sign our names and agree to do this. So Locke called this the consent of the governed, that the reason why a government, why a leader has the authority to make laws and to punish people that don't follow them is because the people consent to be bound to the laws of that government. If we all wake up tomorrow and decide that we no longer believe in the laws of our country, we no longer recognize the authority of the leaders we put in place, our government basically ceases to exist. It exists because of a broad consensus of all of us to generally, with some exceptions, follow the rules. So when it comes to John Locke, he said there's three really important rights that people have. He calls these the natural rights of individuals. And it's the job of our government to protect these natural rights. What are they, you ask? Well, let's see. They are life, liberty, and property. That probably sounds a little familiar to you. You may know this better as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You probably heard that line somewhere, hopefully. Now, what if a government doesn't protect people's natural rights to life, liberty, and property? Well, John Locke said it's the duty, it's the obligation, and it's the right of the people to overthrow that government and form a new one that will protect their natural rights to life, liberty, and property. We call this the right of revolution. All this, I hope, is sounding very familiar to you as good American studies scholars that you are. So, a lot of these ideas are going to be reflected in the founding document of the United States of America, the Declaration of Independence. This you've probably hopefully seen here before, looked at back in 8th grade American Studies over there at Southeast. So, the writer of the Declaration of Independence was Thomas Jefferson. And Jefferson, well, while he didn't include any footnotes or any sources with the Declaration of Independence, it's pretty obvious that he borrowed pretty heavily from Enlightenment thinkers, especially John Locke. Because look here, this is Monticello, Jefferson's, parlor at his mansion in Virginia, and way up there, up at the top, he's got a big picture of John Locke. Had a total bro crush on John Locke, that's for sure. Let's compare, actually. Let's look at the ideas of these two individuals and see if we can identify who said it. When a long train of abuses shows a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards to their future security. But if a long train of abuses make the design visible to the people, it is not to be wondered they should then rouse themselves and endeavor to put the rule into such hands which may secure to them the end for which government was first erected. So which one's Jefferson and which one's Locke? Do you know? Well, the top one, that's Thomas Jefferson, Declaration of Independence. The bottom one, that's John Locke, Two Treatises of Government. Which ideas are similar? Well, let's take a look. Ooh, long train of abuses, design, government. A couple of ideas there very similar, as you may see. Let's look at another example. So in each of these, they were talking about the right of revolution. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. There being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank should also be equal one amongst another. Which one is John Locke, which is Jefferson? You probably knew this one already. This is a pretty famous line up here from Thomas Jefferson. Down here, that's John Locke. But again, we see some pretty similar phrasing here. Both of them are talking about equality of individuals. What about when we look at their ideas about natural rights? I already mentioned this a little bit here. All men are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. People are willing to join in society with others for the mutual preservation of their lives, liberties, and property. Now, if you were paying attention earlier, you already know that the top one is Jefferson, the bottom one there is John Locke. Again, pretty similar ideas that we see. So, we can tell that Jefferson was highly influenced by the ideas of John Locke as he's writing the Declaration of Independence. Now, it wasn't just England that influenced the government of the United States and that had Enlightenment thinkers. The other real hotbed of the Enlightenment was in France. This is Baron de Montesquieu. He was one of the French Enlightenment thinkers. And he gave us this idea. Constant experience shows us that every man invested with power is apt to abuse it, and to carry his authority as far as it will go. When legislative power is united with executive power in a single